The rhythmic, precise whir of the servo motors was usually a balm. In the sterile, climate-controlled hush of the DARPA lab, it was the sound of order, of problems with defined parameters and elegant mechanical solutions. Today, it felt like the ticking of a clock I couldn't slow down. My right hand, guiding the calibration wand over the articulated leg of the quadrupedal prototype, trembled with a fine, persistent tremor. Lack of sleep, too much coffee, and the low-grade hum of a crisis meeting that had bled 3 hours into my afternoon. The robot, designated K9 Unit Prototype 7, was a marvel of my division's work. Titanium alloy bones, synthetic muscle bundles, a neural network that could learn terrain adaptation in real time. It could carry 400 pounds over rubble, open a door, and theoretically administer first aid. It did not have a persistent engine knock. It did not smell of old gasoline and cracked leather. It was not my sanctuary. Eve, Eris Thorne's voice cut through the lab's white noise, a familiar anchor. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his usual crisp button-down shirt sleeves rolled up. The generals have disembarked. The air is now safe for human respiration, albeit thick with lingering testosterone and budgetary anxiety. I didn't look up, focusing on the sensor readout. Did we get the funding line? We got a continued evaluation period, which is bureaucrat for maybe, but make it dance better. He pushed off the frame and walked over, his shadow falling across the robot's sleek carapace. You, however, look like you've been calibrating with a jackhammer. What's wrong? Nothing a 12mm socket and a carburetor adjustment won't fix, I muttered, finally setting the wand down. The faded scar on my right forearm, a silvery web from a long-ago lab pressure vessel failure, caught the light. Eris raised an eyebrow. The Bronco. The Bronco? I sighed, the professional mask I wore like a second skin slipping just for him. Eris was more than my deputy. He was the only person in the building who knew the weight of the dog tags I kept in my desk drawer, who understood why a woman who commanded a budget for autonomous swarms drove a 54-year-old fossil. It's getting worse. The knock is louder, especially when it's cold. And it's always cold in this damn city. So take it to a mechanic, not the usual guy. He retired, moved to Florida, sent me a postcard of a palm tree with a wrench photoshopped into it. I managed a weak smile. I found a new place, Delgado's Classic Auto, over in Georgetown, supposed to be a genius with vintage engines. Georgetown, that's a hike, Eris frowned. You have the senior staff briefing at 4. I'll be back, it's just a diagnosis. The meeting's a formality, you can handle it if I'm late. You know the swarm algorithms better than I do anyway. Flattery will get you nowhere, Captain, he said, using my old rank the way only he could, a tease, but one edged with respect. Fine, go commune with internal combustion. But if you're late, I'm telling Briggs you're off defusing a literal time bomb. The mention of Colonel Briggs, my retired mentor, brought a different kind of tension. He represented a standard I was still trying to live up to. Don't, he'd probably offer to help. I grabbed my leather jacket from the back of my chair, the weight of it familiar and grounding. It was a relic, like the truck. Outside the lab, the world was a symphony of inefficient chaos. Here, I controlled the variables. Out there, in the rain-slicked streets with my ailing Bronco, I was just another driver, another customer. It was the only time I felt truly anonymous, and I craved it. The rain started as a mist, then settled into a steady, cold drizzle that blurred the lines of the city. My 1970 Ford Bronco, a hulking shape of oxidized blue and white, felt like an extension of my own nervous system. Every shudder from the engine bay traveled up the steering column and into my bones. Thud-ka-thud ka-thud. It was a heartbeat gone arrhythmic. The drive to Georgetown was a lesson in patience the Bronco was no longer willing to teach. It coughed at stoplights, the knock becoming a pronounced, angry rap under acceleration. I found myself talking to it, low and soothing, the way I would to a spooked horse. Easy, girl, just a little further. He'll know what's wrong. Delgado's Classic Auto and Repair was nestled on a corner lot, a relic itself. The building was faded red brick, the large rolling doors streaked with decades of grime and rain. Classic cars in various states of repair or decay sat under corrugated metal awnings. A neon open sign buzzed in the office window, fighting the gray afternoon light. It smelled, even from the driver's seat with the window cracked, of oil, gasoline, ozone from welding, and old concrete. It was the antithesis of my lab. It was perfect. I pulled into an empty bay, the Bronco's engine giving a final, shuddering sigh as I cut the ignition. The sudden silence was punctuated by the ping of cooling metal and the relentless tap of rain on the roof. I took a deep breath, the complex, organic smell filling my lungs. Sanctuary. The man who emerged from the shadowy depths of the garage seemed carved from the same material as the place. Franklin Delgado was a big man, broad in the shoulders and chest, with a solidness that spoke of physical labor, not gym memberships. He wore stained coveralls, his hands a landscape of old scars, ingrained grease, and knuckles swollen from a lifetime of turning wrenches. He had a strong, lined face, a close-cropped gray beard, and eyes that assessed the Bronco with immediate, professional interest. "Help you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "I hope so," I said, climbing out. "Persistent knock in the engine. Gets worse under load. I'm thinking maybe a rod bearing, but I'd like a professional opinion." He was already moving, his head cocked as he circled the front end. 1970, 302 V8. "Yes, sir, mostly original." He gave a grunt that might have been approval. "Pop the hood." I did, and he leaned in, his movements economical and sure. He didn't use a stethoscope. He laid a hand on the valve cover, feeling the vibrations. "Start it." I climbed back in and turned the key. The engine roared to life, the knock now embarrassingly loud in the confined space. Frank listened for a full minute, his eyes closed in concentration. Then he gestured for me to kill it. "You're right," he said, wiping his hands on a rag from his pocket. "Sounds like a bearing. Could be the crank. Gonna have to drop the oil pan to know for sure. Not a small job." He looked at me, a flicker of something in his gaze, curiosity perhaps that a woman would own such a truck. "You know your stuff." "Enough to know I'm in over my head," I said, a thread of relief weaving through me. He'd identified it instantly. He was competent. "Can you take a look? I can leave it." "Let's get the paperwork started," he said, nodding toward the office. The office was a time capsule. A battered wooden desk buried under invoices and parts catalogs, walls plastered with vintage car ads and pin-up calendars that were decades old. The air was thick with the smell of old paper, coffee, and a faint, sweet note of cigar smoke. As Frank rounded the desk, I pulled my wallet from my jacket to get my driver's license. My fingers were cold, clumsy. "Just need your name, number, and a description of the issue," he said, pulling a triplicate form from a drawer. "Evelyn Vance," I said, fumbling. The wallet slipped, spilling its contents onto the cluttered desk. Coins rolled, a credit card skidded, and among them, fluttering down like an accusation, was my old military ID card. It was expired, the photo younger, my hair shorter, the expression one of determined neutrality I'd perfected by my second deployment. It landed face up next to his grease-stained ledger. The change in the atmosphere was instantaneous and profound. Frank's hand, reaching for a pen, froze. His eyes, which had been sharp with technical focus, locked onto the card. They hardened, then cooled like molten iron hitting a mold. The professional curiosity evaporated, replaced by something dense and hostile. His gaze traveled from the ID to my face, then down to my hands, as if looking for a uniform that wasn't there. He slowly straightened up, pushing the form away. "You're military." "Former," I said, my own voice careful, sensing a tripwire. "Army, I'm an engineer now." He didn't seem to hear the second part. A deep, weary contempt settled into his features. "I don't work on military vehicles." I blinked. "It's not a military vehicle. It's a 1970 Ford Bronco. I bought it from my father. It's personal." "It's yours. You're military." He said the word like a diagnosis of a contagious disease. "I don't fix toys for people who play with robots." The words hit with physical force. My breath caught. In the doorway to the back garage, a movement caught my eye. A young woman, maybe late teens, stood there holding a mug. Maya. She had Frank's dark, observant eyes, but where his were shuttered, hers were wide open, taking in the scene. She didn't speak, just watched. "Mr. Delgado," I said, forcing my captain's voice, calm, level, unyielding. "My service has nothing to do with my truck needing a bearing. I'm a paying customer, asking for your expertise on a classic engine. That's all." "That's not all," he shot back, his voice rising. "You people with your joysticks and your screens, you think you know machinery? You think you understand what it means to depend on an engine to listen to it. You send machines to do a man's job and then wonder why things fall apart. His face was flushed now, a vein prominent on his temple. You're reckless, you're disconnected. You're part of the system that discards the real thing for a cheaper, shinier toy. I saw what it did. I won't help it. The raw, personal bitterness in his words was a shockwave. This wasn't just prejudice. It was a wound left to fester and poison. My own anger, a cold, sharp blade, unsheathed itself inside my chest. I wanted to argue, to tell him he had no idea what my service entailed, what sacrifices looked like, what the weight of command really was. I wanted to tell him about the dog tags in my desk, about the names I still carried. But I saw Maya in the doorway, frozen, and I saw the tremble in Frank's stained hands. And the part of me that analyzed systems saw a feedback loop of grief and rage with no off switch. My professionalism was my armor. I gathered my spilled belongings with deliberate slowness, picking up the old ID last. I slid it back into my wallet, my movements precise, a direct contrast to his emotional torrent. I see, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Thank you for your time. I turned and walked out of the office, back into the rain. The dismissal, the contempt in his words, military girls, echoed in my head. It wasn't just the refusal. It was the violation. This shop, this simple mechanical problem, was supposed to be my escape from the complexities of ethics and budgets and autonomous lethality. He had taken that simple thing and injected it with the very poison I came here to avoid. I yanked open the Bronco's door, the metal cold and wet under my hand. As I started the engine, the knock now sounded like a mocking laugh. I reversed out of the bay too quickly, the tires squealing on the wet concrete. In the rearview mirror, I saw Frank still standing in the office window, a solid, immovable shadow. And beside him, barely visible, the slender shape of Maya, still watching. The drive back to DARPA was a blur of gray rain and simmering fury. The Bronco's knock seemed to chant his words in time with the pistons. Reckless, disconnected. I parked in my reserved spot, the contrast between the vintage truck and the sleek, glass and steel building never feeling more absurd. I took the elevator up, my reflection in the polished doors a stranger, pale, tight-lipped, with a storm in her eyes that no amount of discipline could fully quell. Eris was in my office, going over a holographic schematic that glowed above my desk. He took one look at me and waved a hand, dissolving the projection. "That bad?" he asked. I dropped into my chair, not bothering to take off my wet jacket. He refused the job. What? Why? Does he not like money? He doesn't like me. The words tasted bitter. He saw my old military ID, said he doesn't work on toys for people who play with robots, called me reckless, disconnected. I repeated the words, each one a fresh burn, a military girl. Eris whistled softly. Ouch, that's oddly specific and deeply personal. It wasn't a generic rant, it was targeted. He's got a wound, Eris, a big one. And he decided to pour salt in yours. Eris leaned forward, his expression shifting from amused to concerned. Eve, this isn't like a bad Yelp review. You're genuinely upset. I looked away, out the window at the rain-washed Pentagon across the river. The Bronco was my dad's, you know that. He saved for 2 years to buy it new, taught me how to check the oil, change a tire, before he even let me get a learner's permit. He said, a woman should never be at the mercy of a machine she doesn't understand. I let out a shaky breath. When he died, it was the only thing I wanted. It's the last purely mechanical, purely analog thing in my life. No software updates, no network vulnerabilities, just gears and gasoline. And that man, he tainted it. He made it about the one part of my life I was trying to escape in that garage. I finally looked at him. He saw a uniform and made me a symbol. He didn't see a person with a broken truck. He saw the thing that hurt him. Eris was silent for a moment. So what are you going to do? What can I do? Find another mechanic. There has to be someone in this city who can fix a simple V8 without conducting a moral inquisition. And the truck. It'll sit until I find someone. I rubbed my temples. The briefing went fine. Briggs stopped by afterward, asked after you, said to tell you he's playing golf on Saturday, and if you're not doing anything strategic, you should join him. A father figure checking in. The juxtaposition was stark. Colonel Briggs, who had led men and women through impossible situations, who understood the human cost of every technological advance we pioneered, who embodied the very honor Frank thought was extinct. And Frank, stewing in his garage, blind to the nuance, painting us all with the same brush of betrayal. "I'll call him," I said, but my mind was elsewhere. It was on the feel of the rain, the smell of oil, and the closed, hostile face of Franklin Delgado. My sanctuary hadn't just been violated, it had been redefined. It was now a battlefield, and I hadn't even known I was at war. Eris left me with a quiet, "Get some rest, Eve, it's just a truck." But he was wrong. It was never just the truck. It was the idea of it. And that idea now had a crack in it, a hairline fracture from the hammer of his prejudice. The knock in the engine was a physical symptom, but the sickness, I realized, staring at the gray sky, might be more widespread than I'd thought. The cool, professional exterior I relied on felt thin, stretched over a new and unexpected kind of hurt. The mission parameters had just changed, and I didn't have a schematic for this. The knock was a death rattle. That was the only way to describe the sound, echoing through the steel frame of my 1970 Bronco as it idled in my detached garage. A week of listening to it, of feeling that sickening thump-thump-thump through the steering wheel on my commute, had frayed my nerves to a breaking point. My sanctuary was dying, and the thought of some indifferent mechanic with a diagnostic computer poking at its vintage heart was intolerable. Frank Delgado's dismissive words, relayed by the retired Pete, still burned. Let the past lie. He didn't get to decide that. I am not a master mechanic. I am a systems engineer. I understand principles of movement, torque, feedback loops, and structural integrity. An internal combustion engine, for all its greasy, analog glory, is just another system. A problem to be diagnosed, and I had diagnostic tools Frank Delgado could never imagine. The decommissioned DARPA mobile manipulator arm, nicknamed Talus by a long-gone intern, sat on a reinforced trolley in the center of my garage. It was a beautiful piece of machinery, all carbon fiber and titanium, with 7 degrees of freedom and force feedback sensitivity precise enough to assemble a watch. Its usual role had been bomb disposal. Today, it was going to be my hands. I'd spent the weekend retrofitting it, bypassing its autonomous routines and hardwiring a control rig to a VR headset and haptic gloves. The principle was simple. I would see through its stereoscopic cameras, feel through its pressure sensors, and my movements would be mirrored exactly. It was a brute force solution, an over-engineered wrench, but it was mine. I slid on the gloves, the familiar cool neoprene tightening around my fingers, and powered up the system. A low hum filled the garage, mixing with the Bronco's ragged idle. I was elbows deep in the engine bay, or rather, Talus was, its gripper holding a mirror on an extendable pole to peer at the cylinder walls, when I heard the tentative crunch of gravel on my driveway. I froze, the robot arm freezing with me. My property was secluded at the end of a long lane. Few people came out here. I lifted the VR headset, the real world swimming back into focus, and walked to the open garage door. A teenager stood there, a girl with dark, curious eyes and grease smudged on the knees of her jeans. She had a backpack slung over one shoulder and was staring past me at Talus with undisguised awe. "Dr. Vance," she said, her voice steadier than I expected. "Yes," I kept my tone neutral, professional. The scar on my forearm itched, a phantom sensation I always got when my private space was breached. "I'm Maya Delgado. I work at my grandpa's shop." She took a step closer, her eyes still locked on the robot. "I saw your presentation at the Defense Tech Symposium last fall, the one on biomimetic actuator arrays. I've been following your published work since." This was unexpected. I recalled a sea of faces in that auditorium, but none this young. "You're Frank's granddaughter." "Yeah," she finally looked at me, a flicker of something, apology, defiance, in her expression. "He's not great with new things. I heard about your Bronco, Pete's a friend. I thought I know old Fords, and I've built a few battle bots for competitions. I could help, if you want." She was offering a bridge. I saw it in her posture, the eager forward lean of a born engineer confronted with a fascinating problem. She was also offering a peace offering, or perhaps a rebellion. I weighed the complication against the potential. Her practical knowledge could be invaluable. My pride warred with my pragmatism. "Your grandfather won't approve," I stated. "He doesn't know I'm here," she said, a simple, definitive answer. "And it's after school, my time." I made a decision. I'm attempting a remote visual inspection of the cylinder bores. The knock is most pronounced under load, but the harmonic suggests a bearing or piston issue. Come in. Her face lit up. She dropped her backpack by the door and approached Talus not with trepidation, but with the focused curiosity of a fellow technician. You're puppeting it, not running a preset diagnostic. Manual control with force feedback. My expertise is in robotics, not vintage V8s. I need to see and feel what's wrong, but my own reach and dexterity are limited in the engine bay. Can I? She asked, pointing to the second VR headset on the workbench, a spare for a theoretical co-pilot. I hesitated for only a second. Syncs to camera 3, wide angle. She fitted it on, her movements sure. Wow, that's intimate. She was quiet for a moment, watching through Talus's eyes as I resumed guiding the mirror. Pan left a few degrees. See that scoring on the cylinder wall? That's not good. We worked for an hour. It was a strange, productive duet. I operated the arm, while Maya became my guide, her voice calm and precise. More torque on the socket, feel that play? That's the connecting rod bearing. It's toast. She knew the names of every part, the specific torque specs for the manifold bolts, the trick to loosening a frozen oil filter. I provided the reach, the stability, the impossible angles. Together, with the silent, steady help of Talus, we dismantled the top end of the engine with an efficiency that felt like magic. During a break, while we labeled parts and bagged bolts, she talked. It started with shop talk, the merits of synthetic versus conventional oil in an old engine, but drifted, as conversations do when hands are busy. My dad was a pilot, she said, wiping a crank bearing with a rag. Her voice had changed, gone softer. Army, helicopters, he died when I was 9. I stopped what I was doing. I'm sorry, Maya. Grandpa Frank, he took it really hard. My mom, she moved to Oregon for work. I stayed with him. The shop, it's his whole world, and my dad was supposed to inherit it. She looked at the grimy bearing in her hand. He crashed during a training exercise, a simulated SAM evasion. But the thing is, the after-action report, they said the data from the new drone overwatch system had a latency issue. It fed his evasive, sweet, conflicting information. A glitch. A faceless, stupid line of code. She looked up at me, and in her young face I saw the root of Frank's bitterness, refracted through a different prism. He saw betrayal by technology. She saw a tragic flaw in a system. He thinks the whole military changed, Maya continued. That they value drones and robots more than pilots, more than people. He thinks places like DARPA, they make war too easy, too clean. He doesn't see the people behind the tech. He just sees the thing that took his son. The weight of it settled in the quiet garage. The knock in my engine was a simple mechanical failure. The break in Frank Delgado was a structural collapse of understanding, a bearing shattered by grief. I understood grief. I carried my own, for my father, for soldiers I'd lost. But mine hadn't curdled into blame. It had driven me to build, to protect. The dichotomy was painful. The technology isn't faceless, I said, my voice low. I've lost colleagues in the field, people I commanded. Every line of code, every sensor, every actuator I design, it's to put a shield between a soldier and harm. To bring them home. The failure with your father's system, it wasn't the technology's indifference. It was our failure. Human error in design, in testing. We bear that. Maya nodded slowly, absorbing this. I know, I try to tell him that. He just hears excuses. Our session ended with a plan. New bearings, piston rings, a valve job. Maya promised to source the parts through the shop at cost, using her grandfather's accounts. He'll see the order, she said, but he won't ask questions, not until he's ready to blow a gasket. She smiled, a little sadly. 2 days later, the gasket blew. I was in my home office, on a secure video call with Colonel Briggs. The familiar, lined face of my former co filled the screen, his background a tidy bookshelf in his home study. I was updating him on the project's funding anxieties, but my mind was divided. You're distracted, Captain, he said, using my old title. He always could see through me. A personal matter, sir. It's complicating my focus. The Bronco. And the mechanic, or rather the mechanic's granddaughter. I summarized the situation, Frank's prejudice, Maya's help, the revelation about his son. Briggs listened, his expression grave. Frank Delgado, he mused. I knew a master Sergeant Delgado in the first cav, tough as nails. Saved his whole squad by hot-wiring a disabled APC under fire. That him. Could be, he's the right age. And he thinks we've lost our way. Briggs sighed, a sound of genuine sorrow. Eve, the military he loves, the one I love, it's always been about adapting. From muskets to rifles, from horses to helicopters. This is just the next step. The ethos doesn't change, protect your people, complete the mission. The tools do. He leaned forward. His grief is a bunker. He's fortified himself in it. You can't assault a bunker. You have to wait for the occupant to come out. And his granddaughter is caught in the crossfire. She's a smart girl. She's making her own choices. That's what we fought for, isn't it? He gave me a faint, paternal smile. You're not just fixing a truck, Eve. You're in a negotiation between past and future. Remember your fundamentals, understand the terrain, respect the opponent's position, and hold your ground with integrity. You can't fix his pain, but you don't have to apologize for your life's work either. His words were a steadying hand on my shoulder across the miles. I thanked him and ended the call, feeling both comforted and burdened by the complexity. This wasn't a logistics puzzle or a torque specification. This was a human system, and I was notoriously bad at those. The fallout came that evening. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I answered. Is my granddaughter with you? Frank Delgado's voice was a low rumble, barely controlled. No, Mr. Delgado, she left hours ago. She's not home, her mother just called, she's not answering her phone. Accusation dripped from every word. She's been spending her time here, my shop, ordering parts for a 70 Bronco, for you. She's been helping me, yes, as a paid consultant, she's exceptionally skilled. A harsh bark of laughter. Consultant, she's 17, you're using her to get back at me for not taking your job. I felt a flash of white-hot anger, but Briggs's advice echoed. Hold your ground with integrity. I am not. She sought me out. She's passionate about engineering. She's bridging two worlds you seem determined to keep apart. I respect her talent and her judgment. You should try it. The silence on the other end was volcanic. I could almost hear his teeth grinding. You stay away from her. You and your robot army. You think you're the future? You're just making it easier to send kids like my boy to die for nothing. He hung up. The dial tone buzzed in my ear. I stood there, the phone in my hand, feeling the familiar wash of frustration that came when a logical argument shattered against an emotional wall. I was about to call Eris to vent when my doorbell rang. It was Maya. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her jaw was set. I'm sorry, she said immediately. He found the invoices. We had a big discussion. He called me. She winced. Can I come in? I need to finish the timing diagram for the camshaft. I let her in, my heart aching for her. She went straight to the garage, not to the engine, but to the workbench where she spread out her notes. She worked with a furious, focused energy. After 20 minutes of tense silence, she spoke without looking up. He said I was betraying my father's memory, that I was choosing the side that killed him. Her voice cracked. I told him Dad would have loved this. He was a gearhead, too. He'd have thought Talus was the coolest thing he'd ever seen. I told him Dad wouldn't want his death to be a cage for me. She finally looked at me, tears spilling over. He said I didn't understand, that I was just a kid. Then he said if I walked out to come here, not to bother coming back. The ultimatum, the bunker door slamming shut. Where will you go? My friend Sarah's for tonight. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, leaving a new smudge of grease. I'm not stopping. The Bronco's a good project, and I want to learn from you, if that's still okay. The weight of her trust was immense. She was choosing a path that was costing her family, or at least a painful rift. I thought of Briggs, of the ethos, protect your people. Maya, in this moment, had become one of my people. It's okay, I said, my voice thick. We'll finish the job. Later, after Maya left for her friend's house with a promise to check in, I called Eris. I needed his particular brand of clarity. So, he said after I'd laid out the week's events, you've started an intergenerational Cold War over a carburetor. Excellent multitasking, Eve. It's not funny, Eris. It's a little funny, from my safe, frank-free distance. You, the person who avoids office parties lest you have to discuss feelings, are now the central figure in a Shakespearean drama about legacy and combustion engines. I'm impressed. And the robot arm thing? That's genuinely brilliant. We should write a paper. Domestic Applications for Tactical Manipulators, a case study in automotive therapy. What do I do? His tone softened. You keep being you. The girl sees something in you, a mentor, a path forward. That's a gift. The old man, he's hurting. You can't fix that, but you don't have to be his villain. Just be the competent, stubborn engineer who's teaching his brilliant granddaughter. The facts will have to do the rest. After we hung up, I stood in the garage. The Bronco's engine block sat exposed, a gutted, complex heart. Talus was powered down, its arm retracted. The air smelled of oil, metal, and possibility. I ran a hand along the Bronco's fender, the cool paint a link to my own father. Frank Delgado was trying to protect a memory, too, but he was pushing away the living, breathing future who shared his blood and his genius. Maya and I had a project to complete. Frank had a bunker to mourn in, and I was stuck in no man's land, holding a wrench in one hand and a robot's control glove in the other, understanding the terrain all too well but with no clear map to a peaceful resolution. The knock in the engine had a diagnosis and a cure. The silence from the auto shop, however, felt like a different, more profound kind of breakdown, one for which I had no spare parts. The rain wasn't falling so much as it was being hurled against the earth. For 3 days it had been a steady, gray drumming, but in the last hour it had escalated into a biblical fury. I stood at my living room window, watching the street below transform into a churning, brown river. My phone, resting on the sill, buzzed with a county-wide emergency alert. Flash flooding, seek high ground, avoid travel. My Bronco sat in the driveway, the new lifters and pushrods I'd installed with Talus's help 2 weeks ago holding strong. The engine knock was gone, replaced by a healthy, throaty idle. It was a small victory in the middle of a personal stalemate. I hadn't been back to Delgado's since Maya had found me in the garage. The memory of her wide, curious eyes fixed on the robotic arm and the way she'd said my name with a familiarity I hadn't earned left me unsettled. Frank's words, too, echoed. Let the past lie. He was wrong about my reasons, but right about the weight. The truck was a link, not a burden. I kept telling myself that. The phone buzzed again, this time with a call. Eris's name flashed on the screen. Please tell me you're not still at the office, I said by way of answer. And missed the chance to test our amphibious prototypes in a real-world scenario? The ethics board would have a collective aneurysm. His voice was light, but I heard the underlying tension. Seriously, Eve, the Anacostas over its banks. Power S out in grids 7 and 9. You okay? I'm on a hill, stable, the Bronco's running. Of course it is. I could picture his wry smile. Listen, I've got a team mobilizing down at the proving grounds with the mules, if you need anything. The mule? Project Chariot's all-terrain logistics carrier. A 6-wheeled, hybrid electric workhorse designed to follow soldiers through swamps, up mountains, and, yes, across rivers. It was my division's baby, a pragmatic answer to the question of how to keep troops supplied in impossible places. We just shipped the first pre-production units for field evaluation. An idea, cold and clear as the rain on the glass, formed. Eris, where are the alpha prototypes, the hand-built ones? In the secure hangar at Quantico. Why? I need one. There was a long pause. Eve, you can't just check out a multi-million-dollar prototype for a joyride, even you. It's not a joyride. The town is flooding. High-ground evacuation points will need supplies, medicine. Standard emergency services will be overwhelmed or unable to reach certain areas. The mule is rated for 5-foot water depths, has a 1,000-pound payload capacity, and can be remotely piloted. It's not a weapon. It's a pack mule. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear him thinking, weighing protocol against practicality. Eris was a rule follower, but his rules were ultimately about protecting people. The paperwork will be horrific, he finally said, and you'll need a military escort to release it. I can't authorize that from here. What if I had a retired colonel on the Defense Advisory Board call it in as a civilian-military disaster relief cooperation test? An unscheduled, real-world field evaluation. This time the silence was profound. You're going to call Briggs. He owes me a favor. He did. Several, in fact, from times I'd saved his pet projects from budget cuts with clever engineering solutions. God help me, Eris sighed. Fine, I'll call the hangar chief and grease the wheels on my end. But Eve, For the love of all that is holy, don't dunk a national asset in the mud and lose it. It's designed for mud, Eris. Just bring it back in one piece, and yourself. The line went dead. I was already dialing Colonel Briggs. 30 minutes later, I was guiding the Bronco through torrents of water, the big tires throwing up rooster tails. The mule, a sleek, matte green beast of angular composite armor and massive, knobby tires, was secured on a heavy equipment trailer I'd borrowed from a neighbor. It looked like something out of a science fiction film, a stark, geometric contrast to the organic chaos of the storm. My destination wasn't the official shelter at the high school. It was Delgado's classic auto and repair. It sat on a limestone bluff overlooking the river valley, the highest commercial point in the old town center. Frank would be there, and if I understood anything about him, he'd be trying to help, and failing because his tow truck was a relic with a dead alternator. The shop's lot was a chaotic relief map of the crisis. 3 cars were parked haphazardly, families huddled inside them. The service bay doors were open, light, and the faint smell of oil and coffee spilling out into the damp. I saw Maya first, a yellow rain slicker standing out like a beacon as she directed a minivan to a drier spot. I pulled in, the trailer's bulk drawing every eye. Maya jogged over, her hood falling back. Rain plastered her dark hair to her forehead. "Dr. Vance, you made it. I wasn't sure you got my text." I hadn't. I'd been too busy commandeering military hardware. "I came as soon as I could," I said, which was technically true. "What's the situation?" "Grandpa's got the shop open as a staging area. We have some blankets, a first aid kit, coffee. Old Mrs. Gable from down the ridge is here. She's got her insulin, but she's shaky. The fire department's got their boats out on the west side, but they can't get into the little cul-de-sacs off Maple. The water's too deep for regular vehicles, and it's rising." She glanced past me at the mule, her eyes widening. Is that from your work?" "It's a cargo carrier, amphibious. I thought we could use it to run supplies." Before she could answer, Frank emerged from the bay. He wore a stained canvas jacket, his face etched with frustration. He took in the Bronco, then the trailer, then the mule. His expression, already stormy, darkened further. He stomped through the puddles toward us. "Vance, what in the hell is that?" "It's a solution," I said, stepping out into the rain. "Frank, we need to get supplies into the Maple Street enclave. This can go where boats can't maneuver and trucks will flood." He walked right up to the trailer, staring at the mule with naked contempt. It was all sleek lines and sealed ports, no visible pistons or exhaust, just the silent promise of electric torque. "A robot," he spat the word. "You brought a damn robot to a flood." "It's a tool, a remotely piloted vehicle." "Same difference." He turned on me, his voice rising above the rain. "This is what's wrong. This is the whole damn problem. You people see a crisis, and you think the answer is some silicon-brained, battery-powered thing. What about people? What about getting in a real truck with a real winch and doing the job yourself?" Maya flinched. "Grandpa, Mrs. Gable needs her heart medication. The pharmacy's cut off. If that thing can get through." "It's not a thing, Maya, it's a symptom." He was yelling now, his grief and anger, usually a slow burn igniting in the storm. "They send these drones into the sky so pilots don't have to risk their necks. They send these walking tin cans into buildings so soldiers don't have to go in. They remove the person from the equation. And people die anyway. They die because a machine doesn't care. It just follows its programming until it breaks or gets blown up, and who cares, right? Just build another one." His chest heaved. The rain dripped from the brim of his cap. I saw it then, not just prejudice, but a raw, personal theology. In his mind, the technology wasn't an extension of human capability. It was a replacement for human courage. A coward's bargain. A cold calm settled over me, the kind that used to descend in the seconds before giving an order in a combat zone. "My team's programming," I said, my voice low and steady, cutting through his fury, "saved 17 soldiers last month. Not by replacing them. By going into a collapsed building after an IED blast that was still hot, with secondary devices likely. It went in because the bomb squad's robots were too big for the rubble gap. It crawled through, located 4 wounded men by thermal signature, and delivered tourniquets and morphine. It held a ceiling beam off a corporal's chest for 20 minutes until a human team could dig him out. It didn't do that because it cared. It did that because a team of people, including me, cared enough to design it to. Frank stared at me, his jaw working. The medevac variant, I continued, the words coming now, unlocked by his pain, can load a wounded soldier onto a stretcher by itself, stabilize him, and drive him out of the line of fire. It gets him to a surgeon minutes faster. That's the difference between a funeral and a Purple Heart. I know which one the families prefer. I took a step closer, the faded scar on my forearm itching under my wet sleeve. You think we don't lose people? My first field test as a captain, we had a tailless unit, like the arm in my garage, doing roadside clearance. It was supposed to be a safe zone. A sniper we didn't know about opened up. The robot took 2 rounds to its chassis and kept working. Private First Class Daniel Ellis did not. He was 20 years old. He died right next to a machine that was supposed to make his job safer. I carry that. We all carry that. Every line of code I write, every circuit I design, it's to make sure that loss meant something. That the next kid like Ellis has a better chance. This, I gestured to the mule, isn't about replacing the human spirit. It's about armor plating it. The only sound was the relentless drumming of the rain and the distant rush of floodwaters. Frank's eyes were locked on mine, the anger draining away, leaving something hollow and uncertain. Maya was frozen, looking between us, her expression a mixture of awe and distress. Finally, Frank looked away, his gaze drifting back to the mule. His voice was gravelly, defeated. My tow truck's dead, alternators shot, can't get a new one in this mess. Old man Henderson is trapped in his house on Cypress Lane, water's over his porch. He's got a bad hip, he can't wait out. It wasn't an apology, it was a mission parameter. Cypress Lane, topography. It dips, Maya said quickly, seizing the opening. The road is a bowl, the houses are on the rim, but the access is flooded. A boat could get to the porch, but the turn is too tight from the main channel. It's a dead end. I nodded, my mind shifting into operational mode. Payload, 1 elderly civilian with mobility issues. Environment, confined space, deep standing water, possible debris. The mule can do that. It has a flat deck we can secure him to. But I need a driver who knows the area intimately. The camera feed is good, but it's not the same as local knowledge. Frank looked at the mule, then at the downpour, then back at me. A lifetime of instinct warred with a new, terrible understanding. He gave a single, sharp nod. I'll guide you in. We worked quickly, a wordless efficiency taking over. Maya and I unstrapped the mule while Frank fetched a length of heavy nylon strap from the shop. I powered the unit on. A soft, green status glow emanated from its front panel. I handed Frank the ruggedized control tablet, its screen showing a fisheye view from the mule's front camera. Left stick drives, right stick turns. It's rear wheel steering so it pivots tight. The throttle is pressure sensitive. Go slow. He took the tablet as if it were a live grenade, his thick, grease-stained fingers looking clumsy on the smooth surface. I climbed into the mule's open cockpit. It had a manual override seat for complex navigation and fastened the safety harness. I'll ride along for the first run, to handle the load and in case of glitches. Glitches, Frank muttered, but he was already studying the screen, panning the camera. We rolled off the trailer. The mule's electric motors whined with a high-tech pitch that was utterly alien in the storm. I drove it slowly across the lot and onto the submerged road. The water rose over its wheels, then up to its midsection. The display on my dash showed the seals were holding, the internal pressure stable. In my ear, through the comms bud, I heard Frank's ragged breath. Turn right at the stop sign ahead, his voice crackled. The current is strong there, go upstream of it. I followed his instruction, feeling the mule's tires grip the unseen asphalt below. The water was now a churning brown soup, carrying branches and other detritus. We pushed through, stable as a tank. Left onto Maple, go slow, debris field ahead. A cluster of trash cans and a small shed wallowed in the intersection. I navigated around them, the mule's articulation allowing it to crawl over a submerged curb with ease. Okay, Cypress Lane is the third on the right. It's narrow, the water's deep at the entrance. We found it. The lane was indeed a steep dip, the water appearing almost black. The houses sat above it on soggy banks. Henderson's was at the end, a white clapboard house with a wraparound porch. The flood was just a few inches below the porch floorboards. I can't get the trailer up the steps, I said. and the deck is too high for him to climb onto from the porch. There's a ramp, Frank said. Around back for his lawn tractor. It's concrete, should be submerged, but it's solid. I hadn't seen that on any map. Direct me. With Frank talking me in, 5 more feet, hard right now, easy, you're on the ramp. I backed the mule up the submerged incline until its rear deck was flush with the porch railing. I killed the motors and climbed out, the water waist deep and shockingly cold. I sloshed to the porch and knocked on the glass door. An elderly man with a wild shock of white hair peered out, then opened the door, leaning heavily on a cane. "Frank sent you, in that contraption." "Yes, sir, Dr. Vance. We're getting you out. Can you walk to the railing?" With my support, he hobbled over. The mule's deck was a stable platform. I helped him sit on the railing, swing his legs over, and lower himself onto the deck. He was light, fragile as a bird. I used the nylon strap to secure him into a seated position, creating a makeshift safety harness. He clutched his cane, his knuckles white. "Okay, Frank," package secured, returning via same route. The trip back was silent but for Frank's terse navigation. Branch ahead left 10 degrees clear. When we emerged from Cypress Lane onto the higher ground of Maple, I saw him standing at the edge of the shop lot, the tablet held before him, rain streaming down his face. He was staring not at the screen, but at the mule itself as it emerged from the floodwaters like some primordial creature, bearing an old man safely home. We pulled into the lot. Maya rushed forward with an umbrella for Mr. Henderson as I unstrapped him. Frank approached slowly. He didn't look at me. He walked right up to the mule, its green armor streaked with mud and algae. He reached out slowly and placed his hand flat on its cold, composite hood. He held it there for a long moment, feeling the faint vibration of its cooling systems, listening to the quiet electronic hum beneath the rain's roar. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, his head bowed, his hand on the machine as the storm washed over him. The prejudice, the bitter edifice he'd built around his grief wasn't gone. But I saw the first crack, and through it, a glimmer of something else. A reluctant, dawning respect, not for the technology, but for the intent behind it. For the application. Maya got Mr. Henderson settled in the warm shop. She came back out, standing beside her grandfather. She looked at the mule, at me, and then at Frank's hand still resting on the machine. A small, proud smile touched her lips, a vindication she knew better than to voice. Frank finally turned. His eyes met mine. They were still guarded, still weary, but the outright hostility had been scoured away. "We've got a list," he said, his voice rough. "The pharmacy. The Anderson kid needs his asthma inhaler. You got enough battery in that thing to make a few more runs." I nodded, a fierce, quiet satisfaction settling in my chest. "It's got plenty. Let's get the list." The smell of rain-soaked earth and diesel fumes was the first thing that registered when I pulled into the gravel lot of Delgado's Classic Auto and Repair. 1 week to the day since the sky had fallen, and the world was still wringing itself out. Mud-caked cars lined the road, casualties of the flood, but the shop itself stood as a stalwart island, its familiar grime a comfort in the upheaval. And there it was, parked proudly out front, looking like a mud-splattered war hero returned from the front, was my Bronco. Frank's tow truck was angled next to it, its hook still dangling, as if he'd just delivered it moments before. My chest tightened. I'd spoken to him only once since the night of the storm, a brief, stilted call where he'd gruffly informed me he was seeing to the truck, and that I wasn't to worry about it. I'd been so immersed in the chaos of the Chariot deployment, coordinating with emergency services, monitoring the mule's sensor data, managing Eris's justifiable anxiety about a multi-million-dollar prototype navigating debris-strewn streets, that I'd had little mental space to dissect what that meant. Now, seeing the Bronco here, a complex knot of anticipation and old hurt lodged in my throat. The bay door was open, revealing the shop's dim, oily interior. I could see Frank's broad back, hunched over an engine block, the familiar blue of his coveralls a beacon in the gloom. I took a steadying breath, the scent of old gasoline and metal filling my lungs, and walked in. He didn't turn around. The rhythmic clink-clink of a wrench on metal was his only greeting. I stood there, just inside the threshold, my boots scuffing on the concrete stained with the ghosts of 1,000 oil changes. "Frank," I said, my voice softer than I intended. The clinking stopped. He straightened slowly, his shoulders rolling with the motion of a man who'd spent a lifetime leaning over engines. He turned, his face a landscape of deep lines and guarded expression. His eyes, usually sharp with defiance or simmering anger, were different. Tired, cleared. "Evelyn," he said, nodding toward the Bronco outside. "Got her back for you." "I see that, thank you. I can arrange for payment." He cut me off with a wave of a grease-blackened hand. "No payment." He looked down at the wrench he was holding, turning it over as if searching for the right words etched into the steel. "That's not what this is." The silence stretched, thick and heavy between us, punctuated only by the distant drip of water from a leaky gutter. This was more than just a mechanic finishing a job. This was a man dismantling a fortress he'd built around himself, brick by painful brick. "When Maya told me what you did," he began, his voice a low rumble, "using that machine of yours, driving through that mess to get medicine to the old folks' home on Carter Road." He finally looked at me, and the raw honesty in his gaze was almost too much to bear. She was lit up, talking a mile a minute about the suspension system, the thermal imaging. She showed me the news clip on her phone. "You weren't just a suit from the Pentagon. You were there." He took a step closer, his boots making a soft scuffing sound. "I had a picture in my head, of what you are, of what that whole world is. Cold, remote, a bunch of kids playing video games with other people's lives." He swallowed hard, the Adam's apple bobbing in his thick neck. "My boy Michael, he loved flying. Felt the stick in his hands, the wind, the sky. He said it was a dance. Then they started talking about phasing out the manned programs, pushing for more drones. He felt obsolete. Like the heart was being ripped out of the thing he loved." I knew this was the core of it, the poisoned root I'd sensed but never been able to name. My own scar, a pale line on my forearm, tingled with a phantom memory of shattering glass and searing pain. A lab accident, a contained failure. His was a wound that could never be sutured. "He died in a training exercise 2 years before the official transition," Frank continued, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere past my shoulder. "Not in a drone strike, but it felt the same to me. The future didn't have a place for him anymore." "Frank, I started, but what could I say? That I was sorry." The words were inadequate, a pebble thrown into a canyon of his grief. "I know," he said, cutting off my feeble attempt. "You're not responsible. My anger, it was a lazy thing, easy. It kept me from having to look at anything new or anyone." He gestured vaguely, encompassing me, the world beyond his shop. "You and Maya, you showed me a different side of it. Service. It doesn't matter if it's a wrench or a whatever you call it robot. It's the intent. It's showing up." An apology. Halting, messy, and steeped in a lifetime of pain, but an apology nonetheless. It wasn't just for the Bronco. It was for every barbed comment, every dismissive glare, every assumption he'd made about me and the work I dedicated my life to. "Consider it a partnership," he said, the words sounding foreign yet deliberate in his mouth. "You needed your truck fixed right, I'm doing it, and maybe you can take a look at Bertha over there." He nodded toward his tow truck, a hulking, older model that looked as steadfast as its owner. "Hydraulic line on the boom is shot. Can't get the part for a week and half the county needs towing. I'm dead in the water." The request was a peace offering, a tangible sign of the bridge he was trying to build. He wasn't asking the head of tactical robotics to fix his truck. He was asking Eve, the person who understood systems. "Let me see," I said. For the next hour, the dynamic in the shop shifted entirely. Frank returned to the Bronco's engine bay, his movements sure and practiced, while I crouched beside Bertha's massive chassis. The problem was immediately obvious, a fractured fitting on a high-pressure hydraulic line. Frank was right, a replacement would take days. But as I traced the line back to its manifold, my engineer's brain, accustomed to thinking in terms of redundancy and material substitution, saw a possibility. The fitting itself was a lost cause, but the manifold port was standard. Back at the lab, we had bins of high-tensile alloy couplers for the Chariot prototypes, lightweight and vastly over-engineered for this application. One of them, with a minor modification I could make on Frank's lathe, would work perfectly. "I think I can fix this," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "Temporarily, at least, better than nothing. I'd need to make a run to my lab." Frank peered out from under the Bronco's hood, a faint glimmer of something akin to respect in his eyes. "You're the doctor." The following afternoon, I returned with the coupler and a specialized sealant tape from our composites lab. The act of working side by side with Frank, not as a customer, but as a collaborator, was strangely calming. He asked focused, intelligent questions about the material properties, his mechanic's mind grasping the practical implications instantly. I, in turn, watched him methodically reassemble the carburetor, his hands performing a ballet of precision that no robot could ever truly replicate. It was all feel, all instinct born of decades of experience. We were two experts from different centuries, finding a common language in the turn of a wrench. It was during this quiet, productive interlude that a familiar, boxy sedan pulled into the lot. Eris's pristine electric car looked like a visitor from another planet amidst the mud and vintage steel. But it was Eris who got out. Colonel David Briggs stood, unfolding his 6'2" frame from the low-slung vehicle. He was dressed in crisp khakis and a windbreaker, but he carried the same aura of quiet authority he always had. My breath hitched. I'd called him after the flood, needing to hear the steady calm of his voice, and in the telling, Frank's story had come out. "Eve," he said, his voice a warm baritone that cut through the shop's ambient noise. He nodded at Frank. "Mr. Delgado." Frank straightened up, his eyes narrowing slightly, assessing the new arrival with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent his life sizing people up. "Colonel," he said, the title neutral. "David, please," Briggs said, extending a hand. Frank looked at his own greasy palm, then back at Briggs, before wiping it hastily on a rag and taking the offered handshake. It was a firm, no-nonsense grip from both sides. "Eve's told me about your place," Briggs said, his gaze sweeping over the organized chaos of the shop with an appreciative eye. "A real sanctuary. And about your son. Michael, was it? 23rd Fighter Squadron." Frank's guarded expression cracked with surprise. "You knew him?" "I knew of him. His squadron commander, Jim Valdez, is an old friend, spoke very highly of him, said he had the makings of a great pilot, the right kind of pilot." Briggs leaned against the fender of a waiting Chevy, his posture relaxed but his eyes intent. "It's a loss I don't think the service ever truly recovers from. We lose more than just a soldier. We lose a piece of our institutional memory, our future." The air in the shop changed. The two men, separated by a gulf of experience and technology, were suddenly standing on common ground, the sacred, painful ground of loss and service. "Jim said the push towards automation was hard on the young pilots," Briggs continued, his voice low. "They felt it, that shift. But David, the goal was never to replace the man. It was to protect him, to give him better eyes, more options. The heart of the mission, the courage, the judgment that always stays human, it has to." Frank was silent, absorbing this. He'd built his entire worldview on the idea that men like Briggs had abandoned that heart. To have the man himself stand in his shop and affirm it was clearly disorienting. "They told us it was progress," Frank said, the bitterness a faint echo of its former self. "Felt like a betrayal." "It can," Briggs agreed. "Change always does to those who loved what came before, but look at Eve." He gestured to me. "She was one of my best officers. Led from the front, never asked her team to do anything she wouldn't. Now she builds tools. The same dedication, just a different set of problems. She's not replacing warriors, she's trying to keep them from becoming casualties. It's all the same fight." He pushed off the fender. "I just wanted to shake your hand, and to thank you for looking out for her. She's important." With a final, warm nod to me, Briggs left as quietly as he had arrived. The whisper of his electric car, a stark contrast to the rumbling beasts that populated Frank's world. The silence he left behind was contemplative. Frank stared at the empty doorway for a long moment before turning back to the Bronco. He didn't speak, but his movements were slower, more deliberate, as if he were processing a complex new schematic. 2 days later, the Bronco was finished. Maya had texted me, a simple message that read, "He's putting the hood on, it's ready." When I arrived, the shop was clean, or at least Delgado clean. The Bronco sat in the center of the main bay, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Every trace of mud was gone. The new paint on the fender was a perfect match, the chrome polished to a soft shine. It looked better than it had in decades. Frank stood beside it, arms crossed, a critical eye scanning his work. Maya was next to him, a faint smile playing on her lips. Well, Frank grumbled, but the edge was gone, replaced by a subdued pride. Don't just stand there, start her up. The key felt heavy in my hand. I slid into the familiar driver's seat, the worn leather welcoming me back. I turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, but it was a sound I'd never heard from this truck before. It wasn't the throaty, slightly ragged rumble I was used to. This was a smooth, powerful, resonant purr. It was the sound of the engine my father had loved, perfectly restored, every component in harmonious balance. I let it idle, listening to the music of it, a tightness in my chest I hadn't even known was there beginning to loosen. I got out, the engine's quiet ticka-ticka-ticka, a testament to Frank's skill. "Frank, it's perfect, thank you." He nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Good." Maya was beaming, her eyes darting between the engine and my face, reading my awe. Grandpa tuned the carburetor like 5 times. He was obsessed. "Hush you," Frank said, but there was no heat in it. He looked at me, then at Maya, a new, unfamiliar softness in his expression. "She's got a good eye, better than I did at her age, asks the right questions." This was the moment. The air was thick with the smell of fresh coffee from the pot in the corner and the deep, permanent scent of motor oil. The 3 of us stood in a loose triangle, the repaired Bronco at its center, a silent monument to the week's labors. "She does," I agreed, my voice steady. I turned to Maya. "That's why I'd like to offer you a summer internship. At the division, it's not glamorous. You'd be fetching coffee and sorting paperwork half the time. But the other half, you'd be in the lab, you could see the mule up close, work with the engineers." Maya's eyes went wide, her breath catching. She looked immediately at her grandfather, the question hanging in the air between them. Frank let out a long, slow breath. He looked from his granddaughter's hopeful, brilliant face to mine, and then to the Bronco, a relic he had restored, just as he was beginning to restore his own connection to the world. His prejudice, that old, heavy armor, was gone, leaving behind the proud, slightly nervous man he'd been underneath. "An internship at DARPA," he said, the words tasting the concept. He gave a single, firm nod. "You'll go, you'll learn, you'll be—" He struggled for the right word, the one that would bless this new path without betraying the old. "You'll be brilliant." The smile that broke across Maya's face was pure sunlight. "Really? Grandpa, thank you, Dr. Vance." "Eve," I corrected her softly. Frank clapped a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of pure, unadulterated pride. The legacy of his son wouldn't be bitterness, it would be her. I settled back into the Bronco's driver's seat. The engine's purr was a vibration that felt like a part of me. Through the open window, I looked at them, the gruff old mechanic and the sharp, curious girl, standing together in the heart of his sanctuary. It was no longer just a shop. It was a place where broken things, mechanical and human, could be made whole again. I gave a final wave, put the truck in gear, and pulled out onto the clean, sun-drenched asphalt. In the rearview mirror, I saw them watching me go, 2 figures receding but firmly anchored in my world now. The truck moved with a smooth, confident power I'd never known it possessed, carrying me forward, the road ahead clear and open.